Hi everyone, I'm Samantha, and our group's topic is the right to personal liberties versus the need for habilitation. In our group, we have Erica, Bree, Kari, and myself. I'm going to discuss the pros of habilitation, Erica will discuss the cons of habilitation, Kari will discuss the cons of personal liberties, and Bree will discuss the pros of personal liberties. In our debate, we will also discuss three themes that we agreed upon to be most relevant to our topic, that we will each tie into our own positions of the debate. These three themes are quality of life, post-secondary education, and employment. So let's begin. The right to personal liberties versus the need for habilitation is a controversial issue that has been debated for some time. In the effort to support individuals with disabilities, many service providers exercise a great deal of control over their clients. According to Bannerman in his 1990 article, they often choose their daily schedule, habilitation goals, and regulate access to activities. On the other side of this debate, clients can be given too much freedom to exercise their personal liberties, and this could impede their habilitation process due to making poor decisions. In addition to potentially making poor habilitation decisions, allowing clients to freely exercise their personal liberties could also lead to moral and legal issues for caregivers and practitioners. This controversial debate encompasses many of the ethical and compliance codes, such as do no harm and respecting autonomy. As behavior analysts, we are both dedicated to our clients and their well-being, as well as upholding the board-certified behavior analyst professional and compliance codes. And now I will hand it over to Bree to discuss a little bit about personal liberties.
Hi, my name is Bree and I will be presenting the pro side for personal liberties. When I talk about personal rights or liberties, I am referring to those described by the Constitution as rights or freedoms given to the people by the First Amendment to the Constitution by common law or legislation allowing the individual to be free to speak, think, assemble, organize, worship, or petition without government limitations or even private interference or restraints. These liberties are protective in nature, while civil rights form a broader concept and include positive elements such as the right to use facilities, the right to an equal education, or the right to participate in government. The First Amendment guarantees First Amendment rights or liberties such as freedom of religion, press, expression, freedom of thought, fundamental individual rights, guarantees from the Bill of Rights, human rights, individual rights, right to life, right to peacefully assemble, right to petition government for redress, right to privacy, right to property, right to worship, and right to petition and assembly. Interpretation of the amendment is far from easy. As court case after court case has tried to define the limits of these freedoms, the definitions have evolved throughout history, and the process continues today. Scottish theorist John Stuart Mill wrote that the only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede their efforts to obtain it. The demand that all other people shall resemble ourselves grows by what it feeds on. If resistance waits till life is reduced nearly to one uniform type, all deviations from that type will come to be considered impious, immoral, even monstrous, and contrary to nature. Mankind will speedily become unable to conceive diversity when they have been for some time unaccustomed to see it. I feel that Mill's teachings are relevant to individuals with disabilities. The answer lies in our recognizing that their freedom, like ours, is to pursue their own good in their own ways, and that our responsibility is never to impede their pursuit. Mill's thoughts and teachings can also be paralleled to President John F. Kennedy's Mental Health and Individuals with Disabilities Act of 1962. Kennedy realized that many children and adults with intellectual disabilities were cared for in overcrowded, understaffed institutions that isolated them from their families and communities. Through this act, Kennedy announced a bold new approach to intellectual disabilities. He outlined recommendations from the panel, including new programs for maternity and prenatal care, initiatives for moving away from custodial institutions to community-centered agencies, and plans for the construction of research centers that would include diagnostic, clinical, and treatment services. I support Kennedy's opinion that custodial isolation is the antithesis of liberty. We need to realize as behavior analysts that community concern and capability are the solutions to isolation and the vehicle for liberty. Boggs et al., who served on Kennedy's panel on mental health, suggested this. Fundamentally, liberty is freedom of choice within the general system of laws and social values. The individual's liberty is impaired when he is not permitted the same range of choices as his peers. Many people in our society, the intellectually disabled included, suffer from unauthorized or unsanctioned curtailment of their liberties. It must be our constant concern to correct and offset these, especially since the people directly concerned are often unable to struggle effectively on their own behalf. I think the perfect example to highlight just exactly what this passage is trying to make clear is the Judge Rotenberg Center case. Too often do we see that these centers for habilitation take away not only liberties and rights from individuals who are not given the chance to express their concerns, wants, and needs, but they do so in a monstrous and horrific way.
No. And now for the first time ever, the public can see for itself what these controversial electric shocks look like in use. Dramatic video of New York teenager Andre McCollins, restrained face down, a helmet on his head, screaming for help. Judge Rotenberg Center calls it treatment.
That was shock number 16 or 17. 31 that day.
As McCollins' attorney just described, the teenager was shocked 31 times in all that day in 2002. McCollins is suing the Canton-based center, calling it torture. Lawyers for the center and its clinicians say McCollins needed aversive therapy because he was aggressive.
These are dramatic takes. There's no question about that. But the treatment plan at the Rotenberg Center, the treatment plan that Andre had in place on October 25 was followed.
It was an emotional day for McCollins' mother, Cheryl, who was in court as video was played from the beginning of Andre's ordeal, when he was shocked and restrained after refusing to take off his coat.
I never signed up for him to be tortured, terrorized, and abused. I had no idea that they tortured the children in the school.
Cheryl testified what her son was like when she visited him 3 days later.
I couldn't turn Andre's head to the left, to the right. He was just staring straight. I took my hands and I went like this. He didn't blink.
Cheryl McCollins did.
Bree, I agree the Rotenberg Center's methods are extreme and horrific. However, in order to teach the skills necessary to promote autonomy, an individual with developmental disabilities must receive habilitation services. I would like to expand upon the definition you provided and add that there are limitations within the use of our personal liberties. Merriam-Webster defines personal liberties as the freedom of the individual to do as he pleases, limited only by the authority of a politically organized society to regulate his action to secure the public health, safety, or morals of other recognized social interests. Within the definition itself, it's stated that within the freedom that is allotted by personal liberties, there are limits imposed to safeguard social interests. These social interests include public health, safety, and morals. When it comes to individuals with developmental disabilities and making choices regarding habilitation, it is imperative that caregivers and practitioners exercise their authority by imposing these limits. The choices that an individual with developmental disabilities is able to make should be selected from a range of habilitation services that are in their best interests. In addition, the extent to which they are able to make these choices should be in line with the extent of their functional level and capability to make choices that are not to their detriment. Samantha will now speak about the pros of habilitation and provide information that I believe supplements my stance.
Thank you, Carrie. As a supporter of the pros of habilitation, it makes sense that I would agree with your cons to personal liberties point of view. Now, the definition of habilitation is the assisting of a child with achieving developmental skills when impairments have caused delaying or blocking of the initial acquisition of the skills. These can include cognitive, social, fine motor, gross motor, or other skills that contribute to mobility, communication, and performances of activities of daily living and enhance quality of life. One argument for the need for habilitation is the idea of involuntary commitment in order to avoid potential lawsuits resulting from the release of a dangerous patient. Involuntary commitment, however, may be seen as a direct violation of an individual's personal liberties. but this is usually done because the individual with or without a developmental disability is unable to do so for him or herself. If these individuals do not receive any aid or assistance and are left to their own devices, they may make irrational, dangerous, and saddening decisions such as harming oneself, harming others, committing a crime, or committing suicide. Another positive side to habilitative services is encouraging learning of life skills that provide joy and accomplishment. It also avoids learned helplessness for people that may not be encouraged to keep up with the academics or life skills that would promote independence and autonomy for themselves. Overall, the habilitation services will aid an individual that would not necessarily inherently choose to go after treatment that would improve their lives, and that is definitely, in the end, a positive aspect. As there are many pros to habilitation, there are also cons. Erica will now discuss some of the cons associated with the need for habilitation.
Thanks, Samantha. Here are some thoughts that I have that pertain to the cons of habilitation. Habilitation relies on service providers to make decisions for their clients. They don't necessarily have a say in their program or their intervention, which could potentially negatively affect the client itself from a psychological standpoint. Also, the service providers are bound to strict guidelines through the use of the justice system. Each client is considered unique, and therefore not all contracts or guidelines fit each client. This could also negatively affect their maladaptive behaviors and will not be able to decrease those behaviors in the long run, which could potentially affect the client's future as well. Here is Bree with one of the themes that we are going to further be discussing, which is the quality of life.
Thanks, Erica. Wilgosh et al. Suggests that parents of individuals with disabilities have reported initially on learning that their child has a disability on being devastated. One cannot assume that this diagnosis leads directly and solely to negative outcomes. Stressful life events, such as a diagnosis of a developmental disability like autism spectrum disorder, require new ways of thinking and acting. The Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 was brought into legislation to give individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities the right to live independently in one's community of birth or choice. With this statute in place, fewer and fewer individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities live in institutions, but instead reside in and receive services in the community. Transition programs can successfully prepare individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to become productive members of society who will live independently and participate in civic, social, and communal activities. This statute can be directly parallel to the BCBA Ethical and Compliance Code 4.10 Least Restrictive Procedures.
Bree, once again, I agree with your position. However, if we allow individuals with developmental disabilities to exercise their personal liberties to the degree that of furthering their impairments by not receiving habilitation services, how will they gain the skills necessary to live independently and participate in the civic, social, and communal activities you mentioned? Allowing an individual to exercise personal liberties over habilitation services diminishes their quality of life. It does not enhance it. Bannerman et al. States many individuals do not know how to choose. In order to gain the skills necessary to learn to choose, as well as other functional behaviors, one must receive habilitation services. Research supports that individuals who receive early intensive habilitation make more extensive, accelerated developmental gains in language and communication. They also demonstrate gains in IQ and adaptive behavior compared to children that do not receive treatment, as demonstrated in Figure 1 of a study conducted by Sivan et al. On the outcomes of early and intensive behavior intervention. In addition to habilitation improving the future prognosis for an individual with a developmental disability, parents whose children have received habilitation services report lower stress levels as a result as well and will experience a better quality of life. Figure 2 demonstrates the maternal and paternal improvement in stress levels after just 1 year of their child receiving services. In my opinion, this trend will continue as the need for habilitation is practiced over personal liberties and their child continues to receive services and accommodations into adulthood that make autonomy not only achievable, but safe for the individual and society. What are your thoughts, Samantha?
Treatment and possible remedies for certain symptoms for the developmentally disabled individual should be more than enough to support the need for habilitation. At the temporary expense of the personal liberties of the disabled individual, Treatments to assist as well as to improve the quality of the individual's life could be provided. A person who is disabled may not have the cognitive ability to determine their best interest, hence making habilitation services a good thing for their development. Quality of life for an individual is much harder to attain if they have disabilities that hinder their way of thinking and maintaining daily life processes, and with habilitation that allows them to develop the skills that they need to be more independent, their quality of life will in the long run be much better. Erica, can you tell us how quality of life can be affected from the cons of habilitation point of view?
Of course. Referring back to our theme of quality of life, according to Bannerman's article, balancing the right to habilitation with the right to personal liberties, service providers make a lot of the client's decisions for them, such as their daily goals, treatment settings, and access to preferred activities. These choices made solely by the service providers promote habilitation, but it may not truly affect what the client prefers. I believe that all clients should be able to make their own decisions on what they want to do and how they want to do it. Providing an above-average quality of life includes having our client make their own decisions or have a say in the decision-making processes. If the client is not cognitively able to make those decisions, at least have a guardian or someone who is able to make those decisions for them. Also, another con of habilitation, and referring back to quality of life, this is also by Bannerman, is the court still has not established a constitutional right to habilitation. Even despite having court cases such as Wyatt v. Stickney and Youngberg v. Romeo, which are similar to personal liberties versus habilitation, the court still does not have strict guidelines to carry these cases. Strides and efforts have been made to establish the constitutional right, but there is nothing set in stone. The court has also guaranteed as much habilitation as needed to ensure freedom from undue restraint. As special needs or disabled person, they still do not have the constitutional right to habilitation. When they are granted the right to be habilitated, funding is only available when habilitation facilities agree to strict compliance contracts. Not only does this mean that the disabled population does not have the support it needs from the justice system, but it affects their personal liberties, but quality of life overall as well. How are we able to set up a successful environment for our clients when the justice system is not able to provide us guidelines with high enough quality of life for our clients? According to Bannerman, when clients do not have the right to the program goals that are set for them or the procedures that are used on them to teach those specific goals, the clients may not be motivated to work towards any goals. This can negatively affect the staff's interpretations of the procedures using to teach the client the goal, when really the issue is the client does not prefer those procedures or targets. In ABA, we are first taught about the importance of reinforcement and how motivating reinforcement is to the client and to the behavior in general. Without the client being motivated to work towards a goal, the goal will not be completed accurately. There has to be motivation present for a goal to be taught. When a service provider makes those decisions for them, they are taking away the motivation the client previously withheld to complete the task or target at hand correctly. Now, Bree will start a discussion with one of our chosen themes, which is education. Can you elaborate more on that, Bree?
Sure, thank you, Erica. As ABA professionals who promise to abide and practice by a strict code of principles and ethical compliance codes, we have opportunities and responsibilities to confront the cultural norms of our schools. We have a responsibility to help others understand as we do that these norms create disabilities by classifying students. We also have opportunities and responsibilities to take structural approaches such as advancing and strengthening policies that promote autonomy. In Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, the court's ruling was that segregation in public education based solely on race violates the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment. In other words, separate is inherently unequal. In light of the Supreme Court's decision, Turnbull et al. Suggests that there are 18 core concepts of disability. For the sake of our debate, I'm going to discuss the most relevant, which are anti-discrimination, liberty, autonomy, and integration. These core concepts reflect three overarching constitutional principles: life, liberty, and equality. They also reflect three overarching ethical principles: dignity, family as foundation, and community. Our nation's national policy, as expressed in the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, connects closely to these core principles. Ross et al. States that the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 helps colleges and universities create or expand inclusive model transition programs for students with intellectual disabilities. The Higher Education Opportunity Act is intended to promote access to post-secondary education, supports that lead to academic enrichment, social and independent living skills, self-advocacy, and employment and career skills for a population largely underserved and underrepresented in post-secondary education. The goal of equal opportunity derives from the Brown decision and reflects the core concept of anti-discrimination and the constitutional principles of life, such as equality of life and equality. This also directly aligns with BCBA core principles such as being just, do no harm, respecting autonomy, benefiting others, according dignity, and treating others with caring and compassion. It also directly reflects the BCBA Ethical and Compliance Code 2.06, Rights and Prerogatives of Clients. Marie, how do you feel about post-secondary education and the rights of individuals with disabilities to choose?
Yes, Bree, I agree. As ABA professionals, we do abide by strict principles and ethical compliance codes. Of those codes, do no harm, benefiting others, the behavior analyst responsibility to clients codes 2.03, 2.05, and 2.09 are included. These codes hold us accountable for providing effective treatment that is in the best interest of the client and therefore supersede the individual's right to choose for their own good. In regards to post-secondary education, according to Shattuck et al., lower rates of post-secondary education participation have been found among individuals with more severe impairments, comorbid conditions, or a lack of access to services. If an individual with a developmental disability is permitted to either choose not to have habilitation services or to choose a less significant service, the possibility of post-secondary education is unlikely. The skills required to be successful in a post-secondary education setting can only be acquired through habilitation services. Individuals who do not receive these services are less likely to be able to complete multi-step directives, follow a schedule, and have decreased language and social skills. All of these are needed to hold a position in post-secondary education. What are your thoughts, Samantha?
Yes, Cree. As with most educational programs through the middle and high school years, habilitation and treatment can be implemented during the time the person with disabilities is in school. Post-secondary education, however, poses a different scenario. Ross et al. 2013 explains that most often these programs are more individualized and independent, and for a person with disabilities who is unable to make choices for themselves, or the right ones at that, will have difficulty excelling in post-secondary education programs if they do not choose habilitation services prior to. The need for habilitation is important for those who cannot decide for themselves which is a better option. Without it, the individual would not be prepared and cannot further themselves as an independent person without the experiences of post-secondary education where they can choose what they want their focus to be. Depending on the treatment required for them, it can really hinder their ability to live more like a normal individual and therefore reflects on their quality of life as well. How about you, Erica? From your standpoint, what do you think about post-secondary education?
Well, according to Agronoff 2013, there's been a movement in the past few years to have disabled populations move from treatment facilities and clinics to a more holistic approach to family and home communities. The decision was made to make this transition just so that people could have more choices of their own, such as independent living, personal assistance, public transportation, employment, and reducing economic, physical, and social barriers in a work setting, housing, living on their own, the use of technology, and post-secondary education. Service integration was designed to be consistent with the definition used by the Americans of Disabilities Act of 1990. When consistent with his or her unique attributes and strengths, an individual enjoys the opportunity to participate fully in all aspects of life. I think this gives a chance to the disabled population to not be hindered to find opportunities for post-secondary education. Bree will now be discussing our next theme, which pertains to employment.
Thank you, Erica. Successful employment is often one of the primary goals for people with a developmental disability. The importance of commencing employability training at an early age, preferable while still in school, has been well documented. Starting an employability program early on can have a positive impact on transitioning from school to the workforce later in life. Unfortunately, when mainstream programs are not suitable or have failed, individuals are often misdirected into learning disability or mental health services, which are unsuitable and counterproductive to promote an individual's autonomy. This difficulty is often compounded as staff is inexperienced and not properly trained to work with these individuals. In retrospect, Ross et al. Suggests that statutes such as the Higher Education Opportunity Act and programs such as the Taft College Transition to Independent Living and Project ABLE provide viable alternatives for people with developmental disabilities to pursue mainstream employment options, independent living, and self-advocacy among a population that is largely underserved and underrepresented. So in order to achieve these liberties and rights for people with disabilities, we and they, as self-advocates, must take advantage of the integration principle that Brown versus the Board of Education, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and other statutes have established. Under these principles, integration is the norm. Integration is not the default position for people with disabilities. Despite the potential benefits of any habilitation, it should not be implemented if it restricts, limits, or prevents the right of an individual. Carrie, what are your thoughts on employment and individuals with developmental disabilities?
Well, Bree, I agree with your pro-employment statements up to the point where you disregard the benefits of habilitation in favor of the individual's rights. That is assuming that the individual has not been taught the skills to appropriately make this choice. In a study conducted by Shatek et al., it states that lower cognitive and language functioning has been associated with lower rates of employment in individuals with the developmental disorder of ASD. However, through habilitative vocational services, many with ASD are able to work in special environments, especially if they are supervised by managers trained in working with persons with disabilities. For an individual with ASD to be able to maintain employment, they must learn the skills to have appropriate hygiene and appearance, handle conflict, plan for and use public transportation or drive, and be safe in the community. Just as it does for neurotypical individuals, being able to work and interact with our peers on a daily basis results in a higher quality of life. Samantha, what do you think is the most important thing that habilitation can provide for an individual with disabilities who may be seeking employment?
Well, preventative detention is an argument that supports the need for habilitation with individuals with developmental disabilities that are seeking employment, because preventative detention is defined by psychiatrist Paulus Applebaum as the hospitalization of persons who may or may not be mentally ill for the sole purpose of preventing them from engaging in violent behaviors. And this is an example of obviously a more extreme developmental disability that may result in violence or harming themselves or someone else, which would make the idea of habilitative services a good choice in order to prevent such acts of aggression or violence. It would also be in the best interest of society to protect the public from a dangerous or violent individual. And from a pros of habilitation standpoint, it is shown to be important that one receives treatment in order to be able to work in any public place when they are shown to participate in aggressive acts and violent behavior. And therefore, employment is affected by whether or not an individual with developmental disabilities is treated. Erica, why don't you tell us about what you think about employment as far as the cons of habilitation?
In the Agranoff 2013 article, there has been a movement for this disabled population to try to become more independent and able to live a quote-unquote normal life with adult responsibilities. More treatment facilities and clinics are wanting their clients to be able to be more independent with living, personal assistance, including the chances of employment as well. I thought the importance of this article was to kind of bring a solution to some of the cons of habilitation. One of them being having chances of employment, the post-secondary education, and quality of life. It's really to let the disabled population know that there are more options out there and not just a residential facility or group home setting. Carrie, you want to wrap this up?
Sure. I'll conclude by saying that despite our different views, I think that we all agree that an individual should have the right to choice. However, it becomes a question of when should choice no longer be a priority. We believe the answer is once it is determined that the individual does not either have the capacity to make a choice in their best interest, or when they have a proven history of making decisions that can cause themselves or other harm. Literature states when individuals are left to their own devices to make decisions, often they will make decisions consciously or unconsciously that may be potentially harmful or inappropriate. This is due to improper knowledge of of making responsible choices. There needs to be a balance between do no harm and respecting autonomy. We believe this balance is struck when the individual with disabilities is provided with habilitation services that empower them to be able to make appropriate choices that result in the individual being able to practice autonomy later in life. I'm going to move over to Samantha for questions.
Yes, it looks like we have some questions from the audience. Our first one is, if an individual was found to be self-injurious or potentially harmful to others, would your stance still remain pro-personal liberties? Looks like this is a question for Bree.
Sure, I can take this one, Sam. Yes, as a BCBA, one of our core principles is to respect autonomy. It is very important to adhere to these principles, let alone the First Amendment that grants us the freedom to live freely and without limitations. There are options to help individuals with these behaviors other than impeding upon their civil rights.
Okay, great. This next question is for Karee. It says, what happens when my child turns 18 and still refuses services? Will I be able to be assigned his guardian and make him continue services at that point?
Well, when your child turns 18, even though they have a disability, you will not automatically be given guardianship. Guardianship is an avenue that is pursued by parents only if a doctor, parents, psychologists, or other caregivers such as teachers all agree that the individual is incapable of making informed decisions without appropriate guidance or information. The role of the guardian is to enhance the person's lifestyle while including that person in the decision-making process as much as possible. The guardian is expected to determine the person's wishes and goals and advocate on their behalf. Guardians must not view their roles as a means for limiting or having a person engage in activities that they do not want to engage in. For instance, few courts would give a guardian control over the social interactions of their ward. Therefore, you cannot force your adult child to engage in services.
All right, and our next question is for Erica. For those in favor of habilitation, and one of the themes is quality life, from a BCBA perspective, how do you assure a parent that their child is going to have a satisfied quality of life?
I think I would start by explaining my credentials and explain exactly what I do, and that I would kind of explain that I'm a professional in the ABA field. One of the roles of being a professional and behavior analyst would be giving the client an effective and accurate treatment. I could provide the parents with any kind of parent training and training to all who are involved in the client's daily life. I could ensure that we could meet weekly, daily meetings if needed to, just to validate their child's success or their progress. I would also recommend any kind of necessary advice or suggestions when needed, always lending support to anyone who would need it with the services that their child is getting. And all of these things, and working collaboratively with family and others who are working with the client, will ensure that the client's able to have a high quality of life while receiving services, but more importantly, further in their future as well.
Okay, thank you, Erica. And our last question is, how might service providers protect both the right to habilitation and the freedom to choose? I'll go ahead and answer this for you guys. Just like Bannerman et al. Suggested in their article that habilitation and the right to choose should not be thought of as conflicting goals, I think a balance of the two may result in more client satisfaction if they are given the opportunity at least to make somewhat of a decision, then they are more willing to participate in the habilitation. Obviously, this doesn't mean that the service provider should just sit back and allow the client to make all the decisions, but more of a way for the provider to put in a little extra effort in integrating choice into the habilitation process. All right, and that is all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. And that was our debate on the need for habilitation versus the right to personal liberties.